Welcome to Module 1, Week 2. We're going to start with Discussion 3 and then we'll move into Discussion 4. I'm going to try to keep the notes really short this time. So this section is obviously most beneficial after completing the reading. So once you've read all of the chapters, then come back and view this video. In Smith, we start off with Aristotle's rhetoric. What I want to emphasize about Aristotle's rhetoric that we don't speak about as much in the discussion boards is the idea that Aristotelian rhetoric is not a form of criticism. It is a form of empiricism. So Aristotle's goal in life was to figure out how does the mind work, because at that time we didn't fully understand how we make knowledge, how we have thoughts, how we connect thoughts together. We're going to see when we get into module about week 3 in this particular course how we're attempting to come up with what the mind does when it's thinking. So Aristotle's point was, how can we think in a very specific manner to make better knowledge and to make better speeches? So ethos, pathos, and logos, while used in freshman composition very heavily as a way to put together an argument, most freshman comp students leave that class thinking that these are ways to criticize a speech. But ethos, pathos, and logos were not actually designed nor conceptualized, and they've not been conceptualized since Aristotelian time as a way to critique a speech. So really pay attention in this particular section to what the purpose and the function of discussing rhetoric is, and its ties to civic life, to civic virtue, and it's also ties to education. Our goal is to make knowledge. It's not to critique the speeches of others. With Aristotle, you'll also want to pay attention to the topoi, especially the organization. So Aristotle picks up often the sophist trend. So in the sophists, Isocrates organized speeches by the head, the body, and the feet. Aristotle adds to that a little bit more, and so he shows where argument and where counter-argument should go in the overall organization to make the best knowledge. He then starts to talk about forms of public address. So all of this comes down to, here's an educational model to make knowledge, to have ways of conceptualizing ideas that can then be conveyed through speech more effectively. In juxtaposition to that a little bit, but also obviously going right along with it, is the idea of Nubian or Egyptian rhetoric. So Nubian and Egyptian rhetoric are both African-based as well as Middle Eastern, as you read in that particular chapter. And what they're focusing on in this specific section and in this specific region of the world at the time is that we can't separate out philosophy from rhetoric. So we see the sophists focus on rhetoric and rhetorical principles in education, and then Plato comes along, and in exact juxtaposition to them, he starts a new movement by saying, no, what we need to get to are these ideas of big T truth. What lies in the great beyond? How do we get there? How do we uncover real, truthful knowledge? And everything that's rhetoric is just fluff, so we need to ignore it. What we see going on in the Egyptian theory is instead those two ideas are married. We can't get to truth, and this is the primordial principle, unless we also have rhetoric. We have ways of understanding, ways of conceptualizing, and ways of dealing with culture. So in very, very similar ties to the Greek and Roman approach, the Egyptian approach is that rhetoric ties together civic life, education, and knowledge. Obviously, for the Greeks and the Romans, there was a slight difference with religion, but beyond that, there are a lot of similarities there. You'll explore this a lot further in the discussion board, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. Finally, to add on to this, we're dealing with the New London Group. So the New London Group is a group of scholars who got together because they saw a problem in education and they wanted to come up with a new way to fix it. Obviously, their article was published in 1994, so I'm sure you all chuckled a little bit when they mentioned that everybody completing transactions online was like this great mysterious beyond thing that they never thought was going to happen. Now Amazon takes over the world. So yay, it did happen, and the New London Group didn't know. But beyond that, what the New London Group is trying to get at is that we have a difference between what we learn at home, what we learn in school, and then how school is adjusting to modern life. So when we look at just the difference between home life and school life, we see a big juxtaposition between kids that are raised in homes that support an educational system and kids that don't. So we see a difference in abilities at the kindergarten, first, and second grade level, especially with kids who are raised in middle-class families. They excel much better at school because at home they read books and their parents stop the book and they ask them questions. In lower income families, they may not have the time, they may not have the access, they may not have the know-how to do very similar things, and so the kids don't respond in the exact same way. Once that kid comes into the classroom and somebody says, you're just not getting this, you're not good at school because of something that they have absolutely no control over in their home life, they now have a bad attitude about school. partly, by no fault of their own, partly it's the education system and the way that it's designed. So now you have two different groups of people, one who's going to excel because they had access at home, and one that's not. And so the New London Group is saying this is getting much, much, much more complex because we have a global economy at this point, even in the 90s. And we have technology that's starting to infiltrate all aspects of our life. So we have even more advanced literacies, ways of reading, ways of writing, ways of meaning making that we need to account for. What happens when the home life doesn't account for that particular technology? Or, in the case of video games, what happens when a kid plays too much and they don't know how to adjust to school? How do we deal with this whole big, ugly contextual situation when we've got socioeconomic status still being an influence and we have meaning making that is approved or is seen as better than others? So what they look at are designs. So designs of meaning available designs, designing and redesign is a way to, how do we approach an educational situation, and then what is it that we can do, what is it that we can offer, how can we make this better, and how can technology help or hinder all of this? So if we know the context and we understand the context, what is it that we can do with all of this? These are the 3 chapters that you'll be looking at and discussing and creating in Discussion Board 3. If you have any questions about those, obviously email me. Okay, we're going to jump to Discussion Board 4. So in Discussion Board 4, we start off with Smith's Chapter 5. There is a separate Prezi that goes over a lot of notes for Roman rhetoric, so I recommend that you take a look at that. I'm not going to go over as much of it here. What I want to focus on are the 3 major theories from this particular chapter, the Rhetorica ad Herennium, Cicero, and Quintilian, all 3 of which you need to know something about. All 3 of which focus very heavily on education, specifically style within education. So how do we teach somebody to employ these principles? So Cicero specifically takes Aristotle's topoi and he turns them into categories, so then they become categories of argument. These are the 16 ways you need to know how to argue. So it's becoming more of a method. How do I employ this particular aspect here? We still see elements of this style, and we're going to see it picked up a couple other times, but if we look at presidential speeches or even presidential debates, the body language of most presidential candidates is very similar to what we would expect out of a president. So if we look at Obama's rhetoric now, he has a very specific way, and he even holds his hand in a specific way, how he speaks and how he addresses and how he looks at the camera or how he looks down when he's gathering his thoughts. And so all of the body movements become very integral to the rhetoric and to the information and then to the meaning making that gets picked up because of that. And so we see Roman rhetoric emphasize that very heavily because they saw a direct link between rhetoric, rhetorical education, and civic life. If you're not rhetorically educated, your contribution in civic life is going to be much, much lower. We continue to see that particular connection, especially in freshman composition today. So we need to educate in freshman composition. So at NAU English 105, we need to teach these students not just how to read and write within academia, but how to make sense of the entire world. Okay, so paired with Smith Chapter 5, we have Oliver's chapter on Asian rhetoric, and then we have Oliver's chapter on Confucius. The Asian rhetoric chapter compares and contrasts Roman rhetoric as a method to Asian rhetoric, especially the tie specifically to knowledge. And the idea that the Asian rhetoric chapter, as well as the Confucius chapter, keep raising that I really want you guys to deal with in the discussion board is the idea of humanism. So if you ask most humanitarians, so scholars within the humanities, what the purpose of the humanities is, they'll respond that it's to look at the human condition, to explore the human condition. So if we look at a discipline like literature pieces and novels that have survived for very specific reasons have explored the human condition from those particular time periods. They've done it in various ways. They've had all sorts of various influences. It's obviously very, very complex. Art, history, architecture all do the exact same thing. And so we're getting a lot of this idea starting earlier in Asian rhetoric than we see in Western culture. So with Asian rhetoric, we're dealing specifically with the idea of humanism. So how do we understand the human condition? And their entire goal in life is how do we make it better? So they're marrying philosophy and rhetoric together. Those two cannot be separated the way that they're easily separated in Western culture, because both of them are so integral to making the world a better place, especially making it a better place through nonviolent means, which for Confucius is really the key. So read through the Asian rhetoric and the comparison and contrasting, and then you're going to have to expand upon that in the discussion boards. And then when we get to Confucius, we're going to deal with something very similar. So Confucius is looking specifically at the political goals of a humanistic philosophy. So he's talking about good speaking, although he does contradict, and say good speaking is not necessarily necessary as much as truthful speaking. So it's the idea that through philosophy, through rhetoric, through thought, through education, we can get to a more just understanding of what society should be, and then we can pass that on to everybody else. So Confucius, as well as Asian rhetoric, reminded me a lot of yoga principles. So when you're dealing with yoga and you're dealing with the breath, it's all, how do I use my breath to make me more comfortable in this particular pose, especially if the pose is really uncomfortable. And then if I can do that in the most uncomfortable of poses, I can take that same mental state, that same mindfulness, and I can use that in all of my interactions with my immediate family. And so then all of my immediate family are going to be influenced by that, and they'll start to be as mindful. And then if my immediate family is, then it's going to just expand out and out and out and outward from there. So when we're dealing with humanism, the political goal is to start with the individuals to get to this mindful truthfulness, and then to expand that as far as we can. And so rhetoric is tied to that because we do it through language, through thought, through interaction, and through education. What we see picked up that's very interesting, and Oliver even points this out, is that the result within China, and then we can see a couple other educational systems based on this, is that that meant that there was a right answer. So we're not just dealing with this idea of truthful speaking. So what is the truth for now? Because Confucius Confucius believed that there is a truth. And so we're going to get to this idea of big T truth, which is very similar to Plato. So where Plato has a very distinct separation between philosophy, truth, and rhetoric is over here in the dirt, Confucius puts the two together and says, how do we use rhetoric to get to that truth? And then how do we expand that? Because unlike Plato, so Plato felt that you learned everything that you needed to know as you fell through the heavens, and that meant that you were only capable of knowing so much. Confucius felt that everybody was capable of knowing everything. And so to make all of this better, here's what we needed to do. And so we needed to approach this idea of big T truth. Finally, the last paper that we read for this particular module is Rice and Hosrath, and they're dealing specifically with the idea of service learning pedagogy. So how do we bring intercultural communication, specifically language and culture, into a very specific environment? So what we're dealing with here, and this is really important because it's tied to these understandings of Asian rhetoric. So when we're looking at Asian rhetoric, we have very specific ways of valuing sources and of valuing information, and for the most part, what we saw in both of those chapters is that information is more valuable when it's historical, and when I as the student can recite it directly, that makes it even more powerful, and that's what develops my ethos. We have an entirely different opinion or a different mindset here in America. So in America, we want individualism. So you come up with your own individual idea and then use all of these sources to support it, but don't plagiarize. So we have huge differences between Asian approaches to writing and argument structure and American views of writing and argument structure. So one of the problems that a lot of freshman composition instructors have, and I just saw this on the listserv dealing with writing program administration, is what do we do when we think that an Asian student plagiarized? Because they're mimicking correct argument structure from their culture in English. So how do we separate the two? And what is it that we need to do? So Rice and Hosrath, they promote this idea of service learning pedagogy. So how do we create civic engagement within a community so that from the community level, and this is where the transactional rhetoric is so important, so from the community level, now I feel engaged and I feel embedded. I learn how to make meaning from the community level out and understand academic discourse in that particular way. So we need to start not just with an individual, and certainly not with direct grammar instruction, because their issue is not grammar, it's how are arguments situated within not just all these different disciplines, but within all these different cultures, and then how do we understand that and how do we learn that? And the point that Rice and Hosrath make is it's not just Asian international students who need this particular understanding. Domestic students and American students need it as well. It's not always clear to students if I go from an English class to a science class, how do I differ my approach? How do these two arguments differ? In an English class, we're huge fans of block quotes. And in science, you still cite sources, but you paraphrase. And you still have to say, here's the cultural context that I'm coming from that influenced this particular experiment, but you're not going going to quote and cite all of those particular backgrounds in the exact same way. For the most part, you're going to say, here's my methodology, here's who influenced it, and then you have this 3-sentence list of everybody and every resource that you need to know in order to do that. So we're going to explore Rice and Hosseroth, especially their service learning pedagogy tied to transactional rhetoric in the discussion boards, to say how can we make sense of Roman rhetoric as well as Asian rhetoric, and then how can we teach that to a group of people. So that's all discussion board 4. As always, I will see you in the discussion boards. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. If you want a quicker response, then direct message me or just copy my Twitter handle onto your message, and I'll get back to you that way.